Good morning and welcome to Bible class here at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Kitchener, Ontario. It's good to be able to be with you this morning, those of you who are here in the church and those of you joining us online a little bit later in the day or joining us in live stream. Great to have you share with us this morning. We're just getting going. We've did 1 week so far in a study that is simply called The Attributes of God, which is a sort of a Bible study that is just a little bit drier sounding than the Sahara Desert. But we're trying to inject a little bit of life into the topic by looking at it not so much from a standpoint of, okay, how do you prove thus and so about God out of the Bible, but looking at it more from our perspective, a relational perspective with God. We know there are a number of things that are true about God, for example, and one of the things we'll talk about today is that He's our Creator. We also know that God is holy. We'll get into that subject, I think, by the end of the hour this morning as well. Well, that's all well and good, but what does that mean for you and for me? How does that shape our relationship with God? So we're taking these what are sometimes fairly dry topics and trying to look at them from a bit of a relational perspective and how does it shape our relationship to God. Now, if you want a lesson handout for today, the one that we will get into a little bit down the road, that's available at the church website. Whoops. We forgot to do what I'm doing here. There we go. And as always, if you're watching online, whether it's in real time or a little later and a question pops into your head about something that was said or not said in class, just shoot me an email and we will take time to answer a few of them. And to a couple of folks who emailed me during the class last week and to whom I did not get back to during the week, the reason I've saved the response is so that we can discuss it together this morning because you made some good insights and some good observations, and rather than just share that with you, I thought I'd share the question and the answer with everyone as we work through the material today. All right, with that all out of the way, time for a few goofy things I found on the internet here these past few days. We are here in Ontario, of course, in the first week of masks optional, not required, perhaps recommended. And if you, like me, are wondering what you're going to do with that vast supply of masks that you have sitting at home that you may not actually need to use up, at least in the short term, somebody has suggested this. How to wear it while pumping gas. This will make the process somewhat less painful. I'm just stunned at how much gas costs, and we know there's all kinds of reasons for that, and believe me, we're not getting into that sermon here this morning. All right, and I found this. This is, sometimes you look for ways to explain what's going on in your head in ways that other people can relate. And I saw this past week, and I went, that's me exactly. That's exactly it sometimes, isn't it? Yeah, you got so many tabs open, a couple of them are just completely shut down, and where is the music coming from anyway? Yes, that's very good. All right. In our Lenten services, we've been reading through the Passion account of our Lord, and a couple of weeks ago, I should have put this one in last week. I forgot I had it. We read the story of Jesus' arrest in the garden, and Peter, of course, getting out his sword and swinging away and lopping off the ear of the servant of the high priest, an unfortunate fellow named Malchus. But new revelations have shown us in new archaeology that Jesus did actually speak a word to Malchus as he restored his hearing again. That's so bad. Anyway, And finally, we are anticipating a more like normal vacation Bible school this year. And Lenora has been working very hard to begin the process and get things ready. We are ready now to announce the theme for Vacation Bible School this year, one that we think fits perfectly with the world that we live in these days. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. That's actually a book by an American theologian named Jonathan Edwards, and that's his picture right there. But I loved this as a vacation Bible school theme, like games, prizes, fire. Yeah. Fun-filled week, I'll bet. They'll never forget it. They'll be scarred for life. But a bit of a segue into what we are going to talk about this morning in the sense of the holiness of God. There will certainly be an emphasis on that in that kind of a Bible class. Anyway, that is not VBS this year, believe me. All right. We got started last week talking about God the Creator. And that's something that we confess every Sunday in the Creed, and we say that God is our Father, the Creator, the Maker of heaven and earth. And we talked a little bit last time about how that story relates in the book of Genesis, but our primary scripture focus is from Psalm number 8, and we have a little bit to go yet to finish this up, especially to respond to some of the online questions, email questions I got. But this majestic psalm that David writes when we presume him looking out into the heavens on a starry night and just seeing the multitude of the stars and the glory that you can see when you're out in a dark sky on a clear night. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants you establish strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. The greatness of everything that God has created. And when I look at the heavens and the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him? And so just to quickly recap, we focused a little bit of attention on what David saw. And as he looked out upon the glory of the creation, he saw the reality of God. And that this didn't just happen by random circumstance to bring this all into being. He saw the magnificence and the majesty of God. One of the neat analogies about creation that I came upon once a few years back was, just how extravagant God is. If it was you or me creating, well, maybe not you, but me, we'd have maybe 5 kinds of birds. A red one, a blue one, a green one, a black one, and some other color. And that's it. What does God do? No, He just creates birds, of all shapes, sizes, descriptions. It's just extravagant. It's lavish. To use the word that you'll hear in the gospel reading this morning, if you're staying for church, or if you heard already in the early service, prodigal. This is extravagant creation. This, and not just there, but all over creation. Not just a few little things here and there, but just filled with things beyond our wildest imaginations. And he sees that magnificence and that majesty. And it, of course, raises the question that was at the end of that first section of Psalm 8. What is man that you're mindful of him? And this whole vast expanse of things. Who are we? We're just like tiny, tiny specks. Someone raised the question online, and it's one certainly I've pondered, don't have an answer to. But is it possible that in this great vastness that God has created, there are other places with creatures like us? The Bible doesn't talk about things like that. Theologians ponder those sorts of things sometimes. Unfortunately, we don't have a clear yes or no answer. The Bible seems to, these are those things where we have to go, well, what the Bible tells us is about us. And let's focus on us. But, what else is out there that we haven't even begun to understand yet in God's extravagant and overwhelming creation? I always find, when we launch a new satellite or telescope into space, that just the new things it's able to reveal, things we couldn't see before. I just find that so fascinating, that what's all out there beyond, what we can just see down here. And again, for me personally, it doesn't challenge my faith in God as the creator, but it actually enlivens that faith to just again see the magnificence and the wonder of it all, and the things that are still going on. I had the discussion once with someone, and we were talking about the relationship between science and the Bible, and this is overly simplistic, I know, but in my mind, the relationship can kind of be summed up in this sort of a way. The job of science is to unravel God's puzzles, and there are lots of puzzles out there that need to be unraveled, and just as soon as you unravel one, there's going to be 5 more that need unraveling too. And He's given us that wonderful ability to do those sorts of things. And so that shapes us for the answer. You have crowned Him with glory and honor. We have a purpose in this world, and we had just sort of begun talking about this and a couple of things related to it last time. You have made Him a little lower than the heavenly beings, crowned Him with glory and honor. You've given Him dominion over the works of your hands. You've put all things under His feet, all sheep and oxen, also the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. And so God, we talked about last time, has created us and given us work to do, to be the stewards of His creation. Reminiscent of what we learn about in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, where in speaking to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1, they're to have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and everything that moves upon the earth. And then focusing a little more closely to where they were physically on the earth. They were put in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And these are things we need to keep in mind, against some of the ideas that are out there today in the world that, we looked at a philosopher, we won't worry about him too much this morning, Bertrand Russell, who just put it all in a sentence, this is all an accident, atoms coming together, and there is no real form, shape, or purpose, and then people have built on that and said there's not really anything like human dignity or human rights. These are all just constructions that we have made. And the Bible would argue back and say, no, not accidental, but very purposeful, and not meaningless emptiness, but all fulfilling part of the creating God's plan for His world, as He has crowned us with glory and honor and given us dominion, the stewardship of the things that He has made. Which leads me to another question that was sent in over the internet about environmentalism, and particularly some of the more extreme environmental views out there where people are bold enough to say that the problem is is people, and so we got to eliminate people. And again, that can be the sort of thing that's that's easy to sort of buy into, for some. But no, that's not God's plan. Again, part of the extravagance of it all is that there are people, and we're to fill the earth and subdue it. Now, that doesn't mean that we're to run roughshod over everything. I mean, Christians should be the best environmentalists that there are, looking after the creation, caring for the creation. That's our first calling from God. Not abusing the creation that we've been given. Unfortunately, we haven't understood that part very well, and that's led us to some of the places that we, difficult decisions we have to make nowadays. But the creation is given us to manage. All right, that's a real quick overview of where we were last time. Any comments, questions, observations from anybody here in the church about what we've been talking about, things you thought about during the week about creating gods? James.
Comment you made about is it Bertrand?
Yeah.
Saying, this all happens. And I think the first thing you have to remind, and this occurs in other areas, is that you're evaluating this from the point of a human being with limited knowledge and intelligence. How on earth can you make a statement you're making based on what little you know?
Right, yeah. James, for those that couldn't pick it up on the microphone, says, those who say this is, all by accident, are making some sort of very overarching statement based on limited human knowledge, which is absolutely true. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, and who knows? Yeah, exactly. Other comments, questions, observations? All right, let's move into the last little bit of this of this psalm here, and I'm just going to flip back a few slides here to the question that David asks, and because the question itself actually contains a bit of its own answer. He asks the question, "What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him?" Now, this is the English Standard Version, which is a very, very good translation. But with great respect to those who worked on that translation, this is one of these places where the good old King James Bible, translated several hundred years ago, actually gives us a little better term. If you dig up this psalm in the King James Bible, where we would read care in the last sentence there, they use the word visit. And that's probably a more literal translation of the Hebrew word that is there. What is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you visit him. And this, again, shows us our place in the creation. I put the King James up on the first line here of the slide. What is man that you are mindful of him, that thou art mindful of him? The Son of Man that you visitest him. That's why we don't use that word, because it's a really tricky one. Visitest him. And what he's pointing to already here is that you are so valuable to God that he actually visits you, comes to you, seeks out a relationship with you. God doesn't just want to be this force in your life, this impersonal, generic kind of power of the universe. But you matter so much to him that he wants to visit you, to care for you, to come to you. Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, when he learns that he's going to be the father of John the Baptist, or after John the Baptist is born, rather, he sings this wonderful song. We talked about it back in Advent. And he celebrates that God has visited and redeemed his people. But by coming, he comes into the creation. He wants to visit with us. And ultimately, of course, we know that visitation happens in Jesus Christ. In its own way, this psalm about creation is also a psalm about God's love for us, that he would come into this creation. He cares for us because of the creation. He gives us a job to do. We all know how badly we've done at the job. We've made a mess of this place. And as long as humans are around, they're going to continue to mess it up. But God's love for the creation is so great that he chooses not to deal with the evil of this world through a show of brute strength, but in weakness. He enters into the suffering of this world as an example of what David is talking about. He visits us. He comes to us. Tiny baby born in a manger. A humble teacher walking in the back roads of Palestine. Or as we're focusing on now, a seemingly weak man hung on a cross to die. But in it all, God visiting us. God becomes small and insignificant. Instead of gaining the power he lost, gaining power, he lost power and went to the cross for us. This is the ultimate proof that you are of infinite value to the Creator of the universe. What is man that you're mindful of him? Well, you love us so much that you visited us, forgave us, died for us, rose again for us. And that, tells you more about your value than any textbook on human rights or human dignity or your enshrined rights in the Constitution and all these other things that we like to talk about these days, and talk about how they're being abused or whatever. This tells us more than anything else about how valuable and significant you are to God, that he would visit you. You, out of all that vast expanse of creation, you and me. All right, comments, questions, observations, check of the phone, see what I'm being sold on Sunday morning this week. All right, living, okay, let's see. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, interesting comment here that, in our space exploration, we're trying to figure out if there was ever life somewhere or could be, but ignore the life that is here right now. Yeah, absolutely. And we're more concerned about everything else than what's right in front of us sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments, observations? Creation, Creator God who loves you that much. Seeing none. Okay, well, I've either bored you to death or whatever. I don't know. Well, let's push ahead. While we take a brief moment here, we won't forget, we're getting back into the old ways here again. This is the attendance pad, and just scribble your name. Yeah, we're not doing it at 2 minutes to the end here. I was visited by the administrative people here this week and suggested that I pay more attention to that sort of thing, which, it wasn't a confrontational thing. It was like, remember, Pastor, we have these things to do. Yeah. All right. Let's move to the next subject. This is on, if you grabbed a lesson sheet this morning when you came in, to the church. You have this in your hands. This is the one that's now available on the church website. I don't think we'll get through this topic today any more than we got through creation in 1 week last week. But one of the things that we say and confess about God is that God is holy. Holy God, we praise your name, one of the hymns we sing. Or holy, 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 another hymn that we sing. And it's a word we use often, probably more often than we use the word creator. We use the word holy to describe our God. Now, we could approach this in a couple of different ways. We could just start looking up every verse where it says God is holy and try to draw some conclusions out of that. Or, as has been our way here, we can take a look at this from the perspective of an event in the Bible that teaches us about the holiness of God. And the event that we're going to use is from the book of Joshua. It's not a particularly well-known story. You may not have even heard the story before because it's not one that comes up in our regular cycle of readings here in the church. And it's not one of the great stories of the Old Testament, but sometimes buried in these lesser-known stories is something of great value, and I think that's what we find here in Joshua chapter 5. But first we have to picture the situation. This is put this story into context. This story happens at the very end of the wandering of the people of Israel in the wilderness, okay? They have traveled for 40 years. Joshua's been in this place before. He was one of, if you recall, Joshua was one of 12 spies who very early on, 40 years before, had been commissioned by Moses and the other leaders of the people to go out and to spy on the land of Canaan that they were going to be given as their promised land. And so these 12 spies went. And they found amazing things in this land. They found it to be, literally as God promised, this land flowing with milk and honey. There was everything there that they could ever want. It was a rich and fertile land, and it was great. The grapes were huge, and everything was wonderful. But it was a fierce, well-defended country, and as they reported back to Moses, there were even the Nephilim, the descendants of Anak. We don't even know who these people were, but they were very scary, whoever they were. And the 10 of the 12 spies that went into that land came back and said to Moses and to the rest of the people, forget it. We'll never conquer this place. It may be full of everything that we wanted and everything that we need and all the great things of the world, but we're not going to conquer these people. No way, no how. And only Joshua and Caleb had said, we can do it, we can do it. We'll conquer these people. God said we'll conquer these people. Let's trust God, not ourselves. But the people listened to the 10. They went with a majority opinion, and it was for that reason that God condemned them to walk another 40 years in the wilderness, that they'd have to wait to get into this land. And so 40 years later, they're again at the cusp of entering into the promised land. And that's where we pick up Joshua in Joshua chapter 5. When Joshua was near Jericho, it kind of sounds from the story like Joshua was maybe just taking a few minutes away from the rest of the camp and spending a little time just with his own thoughts and prayers as he looks out on the city of Jericho, this well-fortified, walled city. When Joshua was near Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked. And behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries? Whose side are you on here?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped him and said, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. All right. An unusual account, but the focus ends up being not on the battle to be fought, but on the holiness of God. Now, I know for some people, and we'll just take a brief moment here, it's good to know where these, this is a story that we can, put on the map. We know exactly where this happened. The people of Israel had been wandering down in this lower section here and had come up through the country of Moab towards the end of their time, and they had come to this little city here that has a bit of an awkward name by in English. We happened to have this as a reading on a youth Sunday, and the young person who was reading it said, "Is that pronounced how I think it's pronounced?" And I went, "That's exactly how it's pronounced. Yep, from Shittim to Gilgal." Anyway, and now what they have done already at this point in the story is they have crossed over the Jordan River, which is this little blue line that runs down between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. They've come across, and they're kind of right at the doorway of Jericho. So it's a place we can put on the map. We kind of know where it happened and what was going on there. So anyway, Joshua has a question. As I put the PowerPoint together, I kind of went a little bit different in terms of the sequence than I did on the lesson sheet. I don't. I do one on one day and one on another day. Joshua's got a question for us. The big question on his mind is, are you for us, or are you for our adversaries? Are you on our side, or are you one of them? And the angel responds by saying, no, neither, so to speak. I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. And what he brings up here in this little short sentence is really a couple of the real diverse ideas of theology. I don't want to get too abstract here or too technical here, but a lot of theologizing, and we see this in the scriptures, runs between two poles, if you were, or two ends of the spectrum, maybe a better way to put it. On one end of the spectrum is what we call God's imminence, which is God's closeness, that he cares about the details of our life. You can experience his immediate friendship, that he's there with you. When we were talking about Psalm 8, where we ended up was at this imminence side of the spectrum. David looks at this whole vastness of creation. And yet, you'll visit me. But on the other end of that spectrum is God's transcendence, we call it. And transcendence means that he is apart from us, not subject to the same limitations that we are subject to. And the angel's answer to Joshua, particularly the first word that he speaks to Joshua, the word no. I'm not here to be your friend necessarily. I'm also not here to be your enemy. I'm not thinking in those terms. Sets God's answer more to this end of the spectrum, to the transcendent end. I'm not asking the same questions you're asking. I'm not approaching this like you're approaching this. Take off your sandals, because the ground on which you stand is holy. And you've come into the presence of the holy God. And throughout the history of the church, at various times in various places, the pendulum has swung one way or the other way in terms of our understanding of God, and the challenge is always to kind of try to keep that pendulum in the middle, because God is both close and at the same time holy and distant and above us and beyond our beck and call. God doesn't just come, to be our friend, who's the way I put it on the lesson sheet. This teaching is often downplayed today. God at times is presented as a divine assistant to humans, helping us to achieve our felt needs. And as I say, all of back and forth in theology, even in something as simple as church architecture, we tilt a little bit. You'll see some churches today, and this is kind of fascinating when I see these churches, newer churches, particularly if they're in a liturgical tradition or something like that. There's a church in Edmonton, for example, a Lutheran church, where the altar more or less sits in the middle of the congregation. And the pews are around the altar on all sides, except for one. And what the statement of that architecture is God very much being with us, right in the midst of us, the imminence, the closeness of God. Now, for those of you who are here in the building this morning, take a look at our architecture. What image do we have of God here? The other. Ours kind of tips the other way, doesn't it? It's the transcendent God. I mean, the altar is far away, and further back, and it's it kind of tilts to the transcendent side of things. And there's no perfect right way to build a church. You can have a church with the altar smack dab in the middle and the people sitting all the way around and still preach a holy God. Absolutely. You can have an altar like ours is far away and still preach an imminent God. But the challenge is always to keep these things in a kind of a balance. But what Joshua is being reminded here is of that transcendence, that God is holy, that he is beyond the limitations that we have to deal with. He's apart from us. And that holiness is really can be expressed in a couple of ways. First of all, there's no one like you, God. God tolerates no rivals. There is a few Bible passages that drive this point home. There is none holy like the Lord. There's none beside you, no rock like our God. This kind of uniqueness of God's love. Or who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? There's none like you among the so-called gods, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours. The Scriptures testify to this holiness, this transcendence, this otherness of God. And with that otherness comes the sense, the understanding that God is absolutely righteous and absolutely pure, that there is he can tolerate no sin. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. A holy God can only perform righteous acts. This God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord proves true, a shield to those who take refuge in him. So this holiness, this otherness of God is what Joshua is brought face to face with as he encounters this angel with the sword. Any comments, questions? Melanie, yes.
Well, what I find interesting about the verse in Joshua is that it actually points to a geographic place. The land, the place where he's standing is holy. And I think in a sense I love 1 Peter, which reminds in chapter 1 God's call or invitation to us to be holy as he is holy.
Right, yes.
We're invited, and as these other verses point to, it's the nature of him, if the geographic place pointed to in Joshua is holy, it's only on account of his presence there.
Right, exactly correct, yes. Yes, for those who maybe weren't able to hear online, Melanie was saying how it's interesting that God's holiness is displayed in a geographic location, which in and of itself isn't necessarily holy or unholy, it's just a spot, but it becomes holy because God is there. And you've anticipated where we're going, because the very passage that you mentioned from 1 Peter is one that we'll interact with a little bit later, where Peter talks what it means, to have a holy God in our lives. Yeah. The holiness of God, I should have also remarked on this on the way through. The holiness of God and the otherness of God is also displayed by the weapon in the angel's hand. Remember what the weapon was? Sword. What did God use to bar Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden? The sword. Yeah. And that closeness that they had enjoyed, that imminence and transcendence in absolute perfect harmony in the garden, was destroyed by sin. And the symbol of their, or the reminder of their inability to go back into that garden again, was the angel standing there with the flaming sword. And so once again, the sword comes into view, and it is there as a reminder. Again, this is, you don't just, this he's not come here just to put his arm around you, kind of thing. This is the holy God who's come on holy business, and the only response that Joshua can give is what the angel tells him to give. Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And I love how some art does this. It makes it look like this all happened, with King Arthur and the Round Table, as he unlaces his high leather boots there, which maybe he was wearing, I don't know. Because this is holy. And holy means to be set apart. The Hebrew word, and on the lesson sheet I made a typographical error when I transliterated the Hebrew into English. It should be Kodesh with an O, not an A. That's a whole other word with whole other meanings that it slipped me when I wrote it out. But the Hebrew word is Kodesh, and it means holy to the Lord. And that holiness, as Melanie just commented a few moments ago, existed in things. The place where Joshua was standing was holy. And there were other things that were holy in the Old Testament. For example, things like some of the vessels in the temple. These aren't obviously the originals, but they're copies that have been made to help us think about and understand what some of those vessels were. And some of them were very, very common vessels. I mean, some of them were obviously like altars and the Ark of the Covenant and things like this, very unique, very special. But some of the vessels that were used in the temple were common, just like a pitcher. I mean, there's nothing except that these are made of gold and silver, nothing particularly fancy about them. What made them holy wasn't what they were made of or their ornateness. What made them holy was that these things were set apart for one purpose and one purpose only. They were completely set apart so that they would only be used in the temple. So, for example, if you happen to be, a Levite working in the temple, and Mrs. Levite, your wife, and you were having company in for the evening, you didn't decide, well, maybe we'll serve the wine in a little bit fancier pitcher than we have at home, so I'll just borrow the one from the temple tonight. I'll bring it back first thing in the morning. We want to make a good impression on the new neighbors. You don't do that. No more than you take the communionware from the church here. We're short a silver goblet for the table this evening. Would you mind, Pastor, if we took the chalice home? No, yeah, we'd mind. Yeah, no, that is holy. Not in and of itself, but because it has been set aside for one purpose and one purpose only, and it is not common, it's not secular, it's holy, it's for the work of the Lord. And so we leave it, and that gives us an image then too for how our own lives are to be lived. Holy God then calls forth from his people holy living. And in the book of Leviticus, in the Old Testament, there's a section, it actually, people debate where it begins. I'll give you the long version, and then if you're wanting to look at it, you can just poke around in there. But in Leviticus, chapter, it usually begins around chapter 16, most people will say, and runs to 26, and some will say even as far as 27, is something that theologians call the holiness code. Because the theme of holiness runs all the way through this, and it covers vast swaths of human life, and some of them in kind of icky detail. Leviticus is one to go into the icky places of life sometimes. But kind of as you go through that section, particularly in the middle of it, chapters 19 and 20, the refrain is there over and over and over again. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. If God is set apart and God is above, then we too are to live lives that are separate from and different from the world around us. And what God is laying out in those chapters of the book of Leviticus is just how separate that life is to be. Or as he says in a chapter later, you shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord your God, am holy, and have separated you from the people, that you should be mine. And it's interesting that in the midst of all of this discussion of holiness, we get this wonderful summation of what's the second half of the Ten Commandments, really. You will love your neighbor as yourself. That's part of how we display that holiness. All right, we'll leave it here for today, unless there's any last-minute questions. I'll check the phone here again quick. Did get one in. I'll respond to that one in an email. Any other questions, comments, observations? All right, thank you for your attention this morning. Let's close our time together in a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have revealed yourself to be close to us, our friend, but at the same time, holy and other from us. Help us to grasp both of these and to see the importance for our own lives today, that you are the holy God who has done amazing things for us and set us apart, yet at the same time a God who comes very near and visits us. Help us in this season of Lent to understand that and to grow in our relationship with you. We ask now that you'd bless us this day and grant us peace. Watch over us, bless our service that is to come, and build us up in our holy faith. In Jesus' name, amen.